chair lays out House Bill 2696 by Representative Howard and recognizes Representative Howard to explain the measure.
Thank you, Chair Moody and Vice Chair Cook and members of the committee. The Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force, also referred to as SASTF, was established by this legislature in 2019 with the intent to create a survivor-centered, trauma-informed, collaborative, and coordinated response to sexual violence experienced by adults and children in Texas. The group is led by a steering committee that includes the Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas, the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, and the Office of the Governor. Other members of the SASTF include a long list of groups. Just to refer you to a few, though: the Office of the Attorney General, the Texas Commission on Law Enforcement, the Texas Forensic Science Commission, the Texas Department of Public Safety, Texas District and County Attorneys Associations, and then there's also a wide variety of other health-related groups that are a part of this, just a wide range of folks. And I have to say, I'm really proud of the legislature for doing this, because what this has done is it's brought all of these groups together who, in some form or fashion, deal with survivors of sexual assault. And rather than functioning in silos, they're actually coming together, and they have been for the past several years now, and working together to communicate with one another so that the response to sexual assault survivors is one that's informed along the whole way, and learning what we can do to have best practices in place. And it's just been phenomenal. Over the past 4 years, they've worked with stakeholders across the state, provided hundreds of recommendations to state agencies, local law enforcement groups, community stakeholders, and to the legislature. And last session, we passed all 11 of the policy recommendations that were submitted to us by the SASTF. These recommendations improved access to our safe, ready facilities, ensured all survivors have access to a forensic exam, and improved access to survivor-centered services in rural areas. 2696, HB 2696 would amend, and this is a recommendation from this year. They have 12 recommendations they've brought us this legislative session. HB 2696 would amend the definition of consent within the sexual assault statute to provide clear protections for victims in circumstances that are not explicitly covered by Texas law. And just as Representative Bojani just did, I am not a lawyer, so I am going to be talking about this from my perspective as a layperson. We do have resource witnesses here that can actually get into the law with you more, though, if I don't have the ability to answer your questions. Current law does not provide a clear definition of consent with respect to sexual violence. It does not specify how consent is to be communicated or understood. This has contributed to low prosecution rates for sexual assault cases, as this vague statutory language allows perpetrators to avoid prosecution. To put it in perspective how current law has created a barrier to justice for survivors, the latest FBI records estimate that in 2020, Texas had an estimated total 13,509 rape offenses, the highest in the nation. And that's just the number of reported sexual assaults. According to research done by the Institute of Domestic Violence and Sexual Assault, only 9.2% of victims actually reported their experience to law enforcement. And of those, about 3% actually proceed to a full investigation and trial. This is why this legislation and their recommendation is paramount. HB 2696 would clarify that consent must be expressed or apparent and can also be withdrawn even once the act has been initiated. Additionally, this bill states that sexual assault is without consent if the perpetrator knows or should reasonably know the victim is intoxicated or impaired by any substance and cannot give consent. Current law requires the actor to intentionally impair the victim by administering any substance. This narrow definition is not clear and cannot be applied in situations in which a person is intoxicated of their own volition but is assaulted by another person. These clarifications in HB 2696 will help prosecutors hold these criminals accountable for their crime and will help to transform Texas's response to sexual violence. We can and we must do more to improve the justice system and ensure that survivors actually have confidence in our system. This bill is the product of prosecutors who work in this space and also working with the governor's office. Updating the consent statute could both encourage more to pursue justice through the law, as well as contribute to a culture change in which every survivor in Texas feels supported and believed throughout the process. This session, we have the opportunity to once again move Texas toward a future in which all survivors of sexual violence have access to the services, programs, and resources necessary to heal. So I'll be happy to answer any questions, Chair Moody, and reserve the right to close.
Thank you. Members, any questions? I just want to thank you for all of your work on this. These are issues that we've grappled with for some time, but I think one of the solutions you propose here in talking about fixing our intoxication portion of this statute is so it is absolutely mind-boggling to me that you can stumble upon someone who has gotten themselves intoxicated and not have not have the same criminal liability as of someone who is involved in that intoxication. To me, the situations are the same in the ultimate conduct. And so the fact that you were spending the time with that person doing that to them or not, it seems to be, always seemed to me to be a problem in the statute. So I appreciate you digging into this. This is a matter that's been taken up multiple times and can be very complex. So thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. And I understand this is a culmination of many legislators' efforts to get here. And I am extremely grateful to the SASTF and working with the governor's office to get some language that can be agreed upon here. So appreciate your favorable consideration as we listen to the witnesses.
Thank you. We do have some witnesses here.
Thank you.
Chair calls Lavinia Bertha Masters. I have you registered as Lavinia Bertha Masters, testifying on behalf of yourself and Hope Saves.
Yes.
In support of the legislation. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, it is.
Go ahead and begin your testimony.
I am Lavinia Masters, and I am a survivor of sexual assault. I'm an advocate. I also work with TASA on the task force, all those great things. But most importantly, I am a survivor, and I support House Bill 2696 and us doing the verbiage of consent. I'm infamously known for the Lavinia Masters Act and my rape at 13, but this sexual assault happened in college freshman year by a young man who was esteemed highly by the school on the dean's list, a senior, all these great things. We talked, and I was under 21, but I had a wine cooler, and he put something in my drink. And at that point, the assault was not reported because I felt I took a blame for it. I thought it was my fault, but it wasn't my fault of the things that happened to me. And when you learn consent, when you see how consent is and how we look at it, we figure, okay, well, she had some part of it, or she could have said no, she could have said stop, but I told him in the beginning this is not what we were going to do. I was drugged and taken back to his dorm room. Consent to me is mutual respect for one another. You respect me, you see me as a person, you see me as an individual, and vice versa. It's not you take advantage or you an opportunity. It's because you see, she's under the influence, or she should have known better. She's not even a legal age to do so. That still doesn't give that perpetrator a right to take advantage of me as an innocent victim. So until we get to that space where we can understand what mutual respect is for one another, I know we have many definitions of consent, and it shouldn't be any separate definitions of how the law sees consent. Consent is consent. I raise my son, no means no. I don't go into yes mean yes. No means no. My grandson, no means no. Give them their space. If they can't communicate, if we're under the influence, if they have drugs, I don't care what it is. No means no. And this is how we should all look at consent. We should be definitive about it when we say that we're going to give consent to someone, and have mutual respect for one another as individuals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and I certainly appreciate all of your advocacy and work in this space.
Thank you.
Members, do we have any questions? No? Thank you. Chair calls Lindsay Richards. I have you registered as Lindsay Richards, testifying on behalf of yourself and the Williamson County District Attorney's Office in favor of the legislation. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, go ahead and begin your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Moody and members. I am Lindsay Richards, and I am here representing the Williamson County District Attorney's Office and in support of House Bill 2696. A young female meets a man on a dating app. They go out, they have a couple drinks. He's nice, he's charming. She likes him, she feels safe with him, and so she agrees to go back to his apartment close by for a nightcap. She gets there and makes it clear that she does not want to engage in sexual activity. She leaves her purse near the door with her phone in it. They sit on the couch, and he gets on top of her, making it difficult for her to move her arms, takes her clothes off, and begins to have sex with her. She does not know what he is capable of doing. She does not know where she is, how to get out, doesn't have access to her phone, so she lays there and lets it happen. She begins to cry as he continues. We can all agree in that situation that a sexual assault occurred. We can all agree that she was clearly not consenting as she lays there crying. But under the rigid language of the statute, the current statute, that is not a case that we would be able to prosecute. I am currently serving as the adult sexual assault prosecutor in Williamson County. I am also a member of the Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force, the group responsible for these consent changes. I handle all of the adult sexual assaults from intake, working with law enforcement, all the way through trial. And I've prosecuted hundreds of these sexual assault cases, and I've also tried dozens of them. The most pervasive issue that all prosecutors face when dealing with sexual assaults is that it doesn't consider the nuances of this type of case. There are numerous cases where we know a rape occurred, but because of the statute, we can't move forward because the facts that we're seeing don't actually fit into the rigid language. As a prosecutor, I've had to sit across from countless survivors and tell them, we know this happened, we know he's guilty, but there's nothing that we can do for you. And I'm asking you, by making these changes, by supporting this bill, is basically just give us a ring to fight in. I'm asking that as the state of Texas is having conversations all across the state about why are these cases not being prosecuted the way that we think they should be. And the reason is because of the language of the statute. I'm asking you, by supporting this bill, to be a part of that solution. And so as we move forward, you can be a part of the change in the way we prosecute these cases. The language that's added is the intoxication language, the should have known language, which creates the standard of a reasonable person and how a reasonable person would appraise consent. A reasonable person standard is used in almost all of the other criminal offenses. So why are we not using it here? It also clarifies that consent can be express or apparent and can be withdrawn at any time, which is a fact scenario we often see in these cases. It allows prosecutors to have to stop having to fit imperfect people into a perfect box for us to prove that a rape occurred. Thank you for your consideration, and I'm free for any questions.
Lindsay, thank you very much. Members, do we have questions? I just want to say I appreciate the work that you do, having had the opportunity to prosecute a couple of these cases. They're incredibly complex. They're very difficult. Statute aside, the fact patterns in some of these issues, I mean, they're very, very challenging. And so doing that work day in and day out is certainly got to be difficult, but I appreciate you doing it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair calls Tiffany Larson. I have you registered as Tiffany Larson, here testifying on behalf of yourself and the Harris County District Attorney's Office in favor of the legislation. Is that correct?
Yes, sir, that's correct.
Go ahead and.
Good afternoon. My name is Tiffany Larson. I am the chief of our Adult Sex Crimes Division in Harris County. I have been a prosecutor in Harris County for over a decade now, and I'm here to support House Bill 2696. In the time that I have prosecuted sexual offenders, I have seen just about every fact pattern that a terrible mind can conjure up. And what I can tell you is that though we have a statute that is long, it just doesn't cover all of the bases. We've added to it many times over the past several sessions, and we're tackling more predatory behavior than ever before, But what we're failing to do is encompass the essence of what a sexual assault is. It's a taking. The more I work on these cases, the more I realize that sexual assault is just one person taking something that the other person doesn't want to give. In essence, it's a theft. When it comes to theft in Texas, we require effective consent, which is the presence of a yes, not the absence of a no. If you think about it, Chairman Moody, if I walk up and I take your cell phone, it would not be a defense to me that, well, he didn't say no, and it seemed like he was okay with it. Certainly, if you're intoxicated at a bar, Representative Darby, and I take $50 out of your wallet because you're too intoxicated to notice, everyone would agree that that is a theft. It would not be a defense. But that is what we need to change here in Texas. Sexual assault should be no different, and House Bill 2696 addresses this directly by adding the words reasonably should know and by clarifying that consent has the same definition that it carries throughout the rest of the penal code, which is expressed or apparent consent. We will be able to appropriately hold offenders accountable and prevent them from taking advantage of this obvious loophole in our penal code. Victims of sexual assault really should never have to hear me tell them, I cannot fit what happened to you into our statute. And those are phrases and words we are using all too often throughout the jurisdictions across Texas. So let's fix the problem. Let's hold sexual predators accountable by shifting the focus to their behavior. Did they actually have consent? Instead of focusing on whether or not the victim raised any objection. Consent is not a given, whether it be money or sex. And so we have to make that clear in Texas. And so I respectfully request and enthusiastically request that you support House Bill 2696. I'm available for any questions.
Thank you, Tiffany. I appreciate it. Members, do we have questions? And I certainly just want to, offer the same gratitude for doing this work. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your time.
Chair calls Justin Wood. Have you registered as Justin Wood, here representing the Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas, neutral on the bill?
Good afternoon, Chair.
Is that all correct?
And members, that is correct.
Okay, great.
And I'll just be brief. Myself and my colleague Liz Boyce with TASA are both signed up as resource witnesses. I'm here testifying on the bill. I represent you today. I'm here before you today representing as a member, a steering committee member of the Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force. As I said, I work very closely with my colleague Liz Boyce at TASA. We help guide some of the policy recommendations that are brought to you. In my role with the task force, I also lead the prosecutor working group that Lindsay and Tiffany are both a part of and mentioned. And I would just say that this is not a new conversation in Texas, as you know. There's been many of your colleagues that have been fighting this issue as well. I was a career prosecutor in a former life for about 17 years and have worked these cases, staffed these cases, tried these cases, and we all know the difficulties that the current consent statute presents, as they have very well articulated. We've continued to add to ways that a person cannot consent, and while very well intentioned, that is not an effective way to really address some of the prevailing issues in these sexual assault cases. So the consent recommendation that you have before you, as Representative Howard laid out, is the work of a lot of dedicated prosecutors that just like you've heard from today, and Lindsay and Tiffany, and really diving in and saying, how can we bring a statute to you that will, or suggestions to you that will give them the tools to effectively prosecute these cases? And they said it as well as I can. And we're here as a resource if you have any questions.
Members, question for Justin? No, thank you so much.
Thanks.
And I know you said Liz was here in the same capacity. Let me go call you up. Chair calls Liz Boyce. I do have you registered, testifying neutral on the bill and representing Texas Association Against Sexual Assault. Is that all correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay,
It
go
is.
ahead.
Good afternoon, Chairman Moody and committee members. I am Liz Boyce, General Counsel at the Texas Association Against Sexual Assault, also known as TASA. TASA is the membership organization for Texas's rape crisis centers, sexual assault advocates, and allied professionals, and we provide training, technical assistance, and advocacy for sexual assault survivors in the aim to eliminate sexual violence in Texas. First, I'd like to thank Representative Howard for carrying this very important legislation for always prioritizing sexual assault survivors. And thank you to this committee for hearing the bill today. TASA is privileged to be a named statutory member of the Governor's Sexual Assault Survivors Task Force, and since its inception in January of 2020, we have worked alongside Children's Advocacy Centers of Texas and the Office of the Governor on the task force steering team. Our collective work has produced dozens of policy recommendations to improve our criminal justice system's response to sexual violence and to create more trauma-informed practices for investigation and prosecution. HB 2696 is one of our many policy recommendations for the 88th legislative session, and the witnesses before me have aptly demonstrated its potential to improve our prosecution rates and hold sexual offenders accountable. At TASA, we stand for survivors like Lavinia Masters, whom you heard from previously, and we support their choices, whether they report their crime or whether they choose to stay silent. But when they make the undeniably brave choice to disclose what happened to them, we believe that they deserve comprehensive laws to support them and help them find justice. We believe this law takes a positive step forward in that direction and furthers the governor's goal to eliminate rape in the state of Texas. Thank you for your consideration of my testimony, and I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Liz, thank you so much. Members, do we have questions? No. Thank you for all of your work on this. Is there anyone else wishing to testify on for or against House Bill 2696 at this time? The chair sees none and recognizes Representative Howard to close on the measure.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members. I am so proud of the SASTF. I hope you are as well. This has been incredible, and we as a state are leading the nation in our response here. It is just an incredible amount of work that these people have been doing, and I am just blown away every time I hear them talk. Talking here today, as we just heard, about the undeniably brave choice that some people make that have been assaulted when they decide to report it. That very small number who actually decide to report it. It is a huge step to do that, and we need to give the prosecutors the tools that they need to ensure that they can follow through with this prosecution. Answering the question, why are cases not being prosecuted? And as they said, because of the language in the statute. Give us a ring to fight in. The reasonable person standard, you should have known. Had a list, keep adding to this list, but that's not encompassing everything. And come to determine that this is actually a theft. It needs a presence of a yes and not just an absence of a no. To me, this is extremely rational and reasonable as a layperson, and I keep hearing about this and it keeps being explained to me. I hope it means the same kind of rational, reasonable way that we can move forward to you. I can try to answer any other questions. I think you heard very well from those that testified here today. But I would very much appreciate your favorable consideration of this. And if there's no other questions, I close.
Thank you, Representative Howard. Members, do we have questions? Yes, Representative Morales.
I just want to commend you and thank you for your for bringing this bill forward. I know that you're absolutely right when you say that the bravery of people who come forward, to let folks know what happened. It is so hard. And I can assure you there's many people in this room who have friends who have been in that situation. And many of them chose not to speak out. Right. So anything that we can do to support those folks would be just amazing. And so I fully support this. Thank you
so much.
Thank you for doing it.
Thank you.
And just to reiterate, not that you mentioned it in your opening, every recommendation last session was passed into law.
That's correct.
And that is why this group of experts working together on this issue, which is challenging in so many different ways, the legal one only being one of them. Mm-hmm. It's important to have that institutional knowledge continue to work, and this is their next round of recommendations. So I appreciate you working on it. I look forward to moving this to the House floor.
Thank y'all so much. I close. Sorry.
Chairman.
Oh, was there, I'm sorry, Representative Bowers.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Representative Howard, for bringing this legislation before us, and to all of the witnesses that testified so strongly. Very compelling testimony. And I want to ask you just a quick and simple question. Is this in the clerk's office?
I think so. If not, it will be immediately.
Thank you. I would like to sign on, and yes, I would like to sign on, and I just appreciate your bravery and courage for being the vessel to bring this to
A
us.
vessel is exactly what I am. The people that are brave are the survivors like Lavinia who keep coming
Absolutely.
forward, and then these great people who are working in the field. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Thank you.
Close.
Members, if there's no objection, House Bill 2696 will be left pending. Their objection, the chair hears none. House Bill 2696 is left pending at this time. Out as a matter of pending business, House Bill 2696 by Representative Howard relating to the prosecution of the offense of sexual assault. The chair moves that House Bill 2696 without amendment be reported favorably to the full House with the recommendation that it do pass and be printed. The clerk will call the roll.
Chair Moody,
Aye.
Vice Chair Cook.
Aye.
Representative Bajani.
Aye.
Representative Bowers. Representative Darby. Representative Harrison. Representative Leach. Representative Christina Morales.
Aye.
Representative Schatzline.
Being 7 ayes and 1 nay, the motion prevails.